Hello, welcome to the channel. If you're a fan of scary creatures and chilling stories, subscribe to the channel to support us and follow the stories. Also, leave a comment telling me where you're watching this video from, all because Sarah Mackenzie stood at the edge of the dense Yellowstone forest, her keen eyes scanning the tree line. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rugged terrain, painting the landscape in hues of amber and gold. She adjusted the brim of her ranger hat, a frown creasing her weathered features. "Dispatch to Ranger Mackenzie, come in," crackled her radio, breaking the eerie silence. Sarah unclipped the device from her belt. "Mackenzie here. Go ahead, dispatch." "We've got a situation, Sarah. A hiker's gone missing in your sector, last seen near Obsidian Creek about 6 hours ago." Sarah's frown deepened. 6 hours was a long time in these woods, especially with night approaching. "Any details on the missing person?" "Male, mid-30s, experienced hiker. Name's Michael Connor. His wife reported him overdue. He was supposed to be back by noon." "Copy that. I'm heading to Obsidian Creek now. Keep me posted if you hear anything else." "Will do. Be careful out there, Sarah. Something feels off about this one." Sarah clipped the radio back to her belt, a chill running down her spine despite the warm evening air. She'd been a ranger in Yellowstone for over a decade, and her instincts were rarely wrong. Something about this situation set her nerves on edge. She shouldered her pack, checked her gear one last time, and set off into the forest. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Sarah shook off the unsettling feeling and focused on the task at hand. As she made her way towards Obsidian Creek, Sarah kept her eyes peeled for any signs of the missing hiker. The forest floor was a tapestry of fallen leaves, pine needles, and moss, making it difficult to spot any clear tracks. But Sarah was no novice. Years of experience had honed her tracking skills to a fine edge. An hour into her search, she spotted something that made her pause. There, barely visible in a patch of soft earth, was a footprint. Sarah knelt down to examine it more closely. "Definitely human," she muttered to herself. "Male, hiking boot, heading northeast." She stood up, her eyes following the direction of the print. It led deeper into the forest, away from the usual hiking trails. Sarah's unease grew. Why would an experienced hiker veer so far off course? As she continued to follow the trail, the sun dipped lower on the horizon. Long shadows stretched across the forest floor, and the cheerful chirping of birds gave way to the more ominous hoots and rustles of nocturnal creatures. Sarah's radio crackled to life again. "Dispatch to Mackenzie." "Go ahead, dispatch." "Any sign of our missing hiker?" Sarah hesitated before responding. "I've picked up his trail, but something's not right. He's way off the marked paths, heading into some pretty rough territory." "Understood. Do you need backup?" Sarah considered the offer for a moment. Her instincts screamed that she shouldn't be out here alone, but she also knew that waiting for backup could waste precious time. "Negative, dispatch. I'll continue on my own for now, but have a team on standby just in case." "Copy that. Be safe out there, Sarah." As darkness fell, Sarah reluctantly decided to make camp. She found a small clearing and quickly set up her tent, her movements efficient and practiced. As she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She sat by her small campfire, sipping from a thermos of coffee and staring into the flames. The forest around her seemed alive with whispers and movement. Shadows danced at the edge of her vision, always disappearing when she turned to look. "Get a grip, Mackenzie," she chided herself. "You're letting your imagination run wild." But as she crawled into her sleeping bag later that night, Sarah couldn't help but feel that something was very wrong in these woods. The missing hiker, the strange tracks leading off trail, the oppressive feeling of being watched. It all added up to a mystery that set her teeth on edge. She lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind through the trees sounded almost like whispers, carrying fragments of words she couldn't quite make out. Was that a twig snapping in the distance, or just her tired mind playing tricks on her? Just as she was finally drifting off to sleep, A sound jolted her fully awake. It was a cry, not quite human, not quite animal, echoing through the trees. Sarah sat up, her heart pounding. "Hello?" she called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. No response came, save for the usual nighttime sounds of the forest. But now those familiar noises seemed sinister, as if hiding something just beyond her perception. Sarah reached for her flashlight, her hand trembling slightly. She unzipped the tent and peered out into the darkness. The beam of her light cut through the gloom, illuminating trees and underbrush but revealing nothing unusual. She was about to retreat back into her tent when something caught her eye. There, at the very edge of her flashlight's beam, was a footprint, but this wasn't the clear human print she'd been following earlier. This print was different. Larger, with an odd shape she couldn't quite make out in the dim light. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had the sudden, irrational urge to pack up camp and flee back to the ranger station, but she knew she couldn't abandon her mission. Someone was still out there, lost, and possibly in danger. With a deep breath, Sarah steeled herself. "First light," she whispered to herself. "As soon as it's bright enough to see, I'll check out that print and continue the search." She zipped up her tent and lay back down, but sleep eluded her for the rest of the night. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. What had happened to the missing hiker? What had made that strange cry? And what could have left that bizarre footprint? As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, Sarah was already up and breaking camp. She was eager to get moving to solve this mystery before it drove her mad. But as she shouldered her pack and turned to where she'd seen the strange print the night before, she froze. There, in the soft earth, was a trail of footprints. They started as the familiar human boot prints she'd been following yesterday. But as her eyes followed the trail, she saw them change. Gradually at first, then suddenly, dramatically, the human prints transformed into something else entirely, something larger with odd protrusions that could have been claws or hooves. Sarah's mind reeled, unable to process what she was seeing. The footprints she had been following had suddenly changed from human to something she didn't recognize. And as she stood there, the rising sun illuminating the impossible trail before her, Sarah knew that her real journey was only just beginning. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Sarah Mackenzie blinked away the remnants of a restless night, her mind still grappling with the bizarre trail of footprints before her. She knelt down, running her fingers over the indentations in the soft earth. "What the hell am I looking at?" she muttered to herself, tracing the outline of a print that was decidedly not human. Sarah's radio crackled to life, startling her. "Dispatch to Ranger Mackenzie, come in." She fumbled for the device, her eyes never leaving the strange tracks. "Mackenzie here. Go ahead. Dispatch." "Any updates on our missing hiker, Sarah?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how to explain what she was seeing. "I've found some tracks, but they're not what I expected. I need more time to investigate." "Copy that. Keep us posted. And Sarah, be careful out there." "Will do, dispatch. Mackenzie out." Pocketing the radio, Sarah stood and surveyed the trail ahead. The prints led deeper into the forest, away from any marked paths. With a deep breath, she shouldered her pack and began to follow them. As she moved through the dense underbrush, Sarah's mind raced. Years of experience told her this was impossible, yet the evidence was right in front of her. Human footprints don't just change into whatever these were. The forest seemed different today. The usual chirping of birds was absent, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the crunch of leaves under Sarah's boots. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, unseen eyes following her every move. After an hour of tracking, Sarah came across a small clearing. The footprints here were erratic, as if their owner had been running or fighting something. She crouched down to examine them more closely. "What happened to you, Michael?" she whispered, addressing the missing hiker. As if in response, a twig snapped somewhere behind her. Sarah whirled around, her hand instinctively going to the tranquilizer gun at her hip. "Hello?" she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Michael Connor, this is Ranger Mackenzie. If you can hear me, please respond." Silence was her only answer. Sarah scanned the tree line, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing. She was about to turn back to the tracks when she saw it. A flash of something dark moving just at the edge of her vision. "Hey!" she shouted, breaking into a run towards the movement. Sarah crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at her face. She could hear something large moving ahead of her but couldn't get a clear view. Suddenly the sound stopped. Sarah skidded to a halt, breathing heavily. She found herself in another small clearing. In the center, the ground was torn up as if by large hooves, and there, half hidden in the disturbed earth, was a backpack. Sarah approached cautiously, her senses on high alert. She crouched down and carefully opened the bag. Inside, she found a water bottle, some energy bars, and a wallet. She flipped it open, revealing a driver's license for Michael Connor. "Damn," she breathed. "What happened to you?" A rustling in the bushes behind her made Sarah spin around, her tranquilizer gun drawn. "Who's there? Show yourself!" For a moment, nothing moved. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. It was a horse, but unlike any she had ever seen. Its coat was a deep midnight black that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its eyes gleamed with an unnatural intelligence. Sarah's hand shook as she kept her gun trained on the creature. "Easy now," she said, more to herself than the horse. "Easy." The horse took a step forward, and Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. But before she could fire, a sound froze her in place. It was a shriek, high-pitched and inhuman, echoing through the forest. The horse's ears flattened against its head, and without warning it turned and galloped away into the trees. Sarah stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding in her chest. "What the hell is going on here?" she whispered to the empty clearing. With trembling hands, Sarah retrieved her radio. "Mackenzie to dispatch, come in." "Go ahead, Sarah," came the reply. "I've found some of the hikers' belongings, but there's something else out here, something I can't explain." There was a pause before dispatch responded. "Do you need backup, Sarah?" Sarah looked at the torn-up ground, the strange hoof prints leading away into the forest. "Negative," she said finally. "I need to figure this out, but keep the team on standby." "Copy that. Be safe out there." Sarah clipped the radio back to her belt and turned to study the hoof prints. They were larger than normal horse tracks, with an odd, almost clawed appearance at the edges. As she followed them with her eyes, she realized with a start that they morphed back into human footprints just at the edge of the clearing. "Impossible," she breathed. But there it was, plain as day. The prints shifted from horse to human in the space of a few steps. Sarah's mind reeled, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. A memory surfaced, an old Shoshone legend she'd heard years ago, something about spirit animals and shapeshifters. She'd dismissed it as mere folklore at the time, but now... Sarah shook her head, trying to clear it. "Focus, Mackenzie," she told herself sternly. "There has to be a logical explanation for this." But as she gathered Michael's belongings and prepared to continue tracking, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled into something far beyond her understanding. The forest around her seemed to pulse with an ancient, hidden energy. As if to confirm her thoughts, another shriek echoed through the trees, closer this time. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes scanning the shadows between the trunks. For a split second, she thought she saw a figure, not quite human, not quite animal, watching her from the darkness. Then it was gone, leaving Sarah alone in the clearing with her racing thoughts and the impossible tracks leading deeper into the unknown. With a deep breath, Sarah shouldered her pack and Michael's backpack. "Well," she said to the silent forest, "only one way to find out what's going on." And with that she set off, following the tracks that shifted between human and something else entirely. leading her towards a mystery that threatened to shatter everything she thought she knew about the world. Sarah's boots crunched on the forest floor as she pushed through the dense undergrowth. The bizarre tracks she'd been following for hours led her deeper into uncharted territory. The sun hung low in the sky, its fading light barely penetrating the thick canopy above. "Come on, Michael," she muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. "Where are you?" As if in answer to her question, the trees suddenly thinned, revealing a small clearing ahead. Sarah's heart leapt as she spotted something colorful among the muted browns and greens of the forest. She rushed forward, her fatigue forgotten. In the center of the clearing lay a torn piece of fabric, a red flannel shirt, ripped and muddy. Next to it was a battered hiking boot. "Oh no," Sarah breathed, crouching down to examine the items. She pulled out the photo of Michael Connor she'd been given and compared it to the shirt. It was a match. Her radio crackled to life, making her jump. "Dispatch to Mackenzie, come in." Sarah fumbled for the device. "Mackenzie here. Go ahead. Dispatch." "Any progress, Sarah? It's getting late. We're thinking about sending in a search team." Sarah looked at the torn shirt in her hand, then at the strange tracks leading away from the clearing. Something told her that bringing in more people right now would be a mistake. "Negative, dispatch. I found some of Connor's belongings, but I think I'm close. Give me until morning. If I haven't found him by then, we'll bring in the team." There was a pause before dispatch responded. "All right, Sarah. But be careful. Something about this doesn't feel right." "You're telling me," Sarah muttered under her breath. "Louder," she said. "Copy that. I'll check in at first light. Mackenzie out." As she clipped the radio back to her belt, a twig snapped somewhere behind her. Sarah whirled around, her hand instinctively going to the tranquilizer gun at her hip. "Hello?" she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Michael? Is that you?" Silence was her only answer. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the usual evening sounds conspicuously absent. Sarah's eyes scanned the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. There, a flash of something dark at the edge of her vision. Sarah turned slowly, her fingers curling around the grip of her tranquilizer gun. "I know you're out there," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm here to help. Please, show yourself." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a rustle of leaves, a massive shape emerged from the shadows. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was the horse she'd glimpsed earlier, but seeing it fully in the fading light took her breath away. Its coat was the deepest black she'd ever seen, seeming to absorb what little light remained. But it was the creature's eyes that truly captivated her. They glowed with an otherworldly intelligence, boring into Sarah with an intensity that made her shiver. Slowly, Sarah raised her hands, showing she meant no harm. "Easy there," she said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The horse snorted, pawing at the ground with a massive hoof. It was then that Sarah noticed the strange markings on its flank, intricate swirls and symbols that seemed to shimmer and shift as she looked at them. A memory stirred in the back of Sarah's mind, an old Shoshone legend she'd heard years ago. Something about spirit animals and humans who could take their shape. She'd dismissed it as mere folklore at the time, but now... "Impossible," she whispered. The horse's ears pricked forward at the sound of her voice. It took a step closer, its movements graceful despite its enormous size. Sarah's hand tightened on her tranquilizer gun, but she didn't raise it. Something told her that would be a grave mistake. "Michael?" she asked, hardly believing what she was saying. Is that you?" The horse tossed its head, letting out a soft whinny that sounded almost like laughter. It took another step towards Sarah, close enough now that she could feel its warm breath on her face. Sarah's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. People didn't just turn into animals. It defied everything she knew about the world. And yet, the evidence was right in front of her. The changing tracks, the torn clothing, and now this magnificent, impossible creature. "Okay," Sarah said, more to herself than the horse. "Okay, let's say for argument's sake that you are Michael. Or were Michael. How do we change you back?" The horse, Michael, shook its mane and turned, walking a few paces away. It looked back at Sarah expectantly. "You want me to follow you?" Sarah asked. The horse nodded, actually nodded, and started walking towards the edge of the clearing. Sarah hesitated for a moment. Everything she'd been taught, everything she knew about the natural world, told her this was insane. But her instincts, honed by years in the wilderness, were screaming at her to trust what she was seeing. "I must be out of my mind," Sarah muttered. Then, louder, "All right, lead the way." As she followed the horse into the deepening twilight, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving behind more than just the clearing. She was stepping into a world where the lines between reality and legend blurred, where the impossible became possible. A twig snapped under her boot, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. The horse's ears swiveled back towards her, its glowing eyes seeming to say, "Careful now. We're not alone out here." Sarah nodded, moving more cautiously. As they traveled deeper into the unknown, the trees seemed to close in around them, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. The last remnants of daylight faded, plunging the forest into an inky blackness. Just as Sarah was about to suggest they stop for the night, the horse halted. Ahead, barely visible in the gloom, was the mouth of a cave. "In there?" Sarah asked, unable to keep the apprehension from her voice. The horse nickered softly, nudging her forward with its nose. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. "All right," she said. "Into the unknown we go." As she stepped towards the cave entrance, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to uncover secrets that would change her life forever. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen. Sarah stood at the mouth of the cave, her flashlight beam barely penetrating the inky darkness within. The strange horse, possibly Michael, she reminded herself, nudged her gently from behind, urging her forward. All right, she muttered, taking a tentative step into the cave. "I'm going, but if this turns out to be some elaborate prank, I'm putting you on stable duty for a month, Michael." The horse snorted, almost sounding amused. Sarah shook her head, still struggling to wrap her mind around the situation. As they moved deeper into the cave, the air grew cooler and damper. The beam of her flashlight danced across the rocky walls, revealing glimpses of strange, shimmering minerals embedded in the stone. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the narrow passage opened up into a vast cavern. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as her light illuminated the space. The walls were covered in intricate paintings depicting scenes of humans transforming into various animals. "My God," she whispered, approaching one of the walls. Her fingers traced the outline of a figure mid-transformation, half human, half wolf. "This is incredible." The horse moved to stand beside her, its eyes reflecting the light of her flashlight. Sarah turned to face it, really studying the creature for the first time. Its coat was the deepest black she'd ever seen, seeming to absorb the light around it. But it was the markings on its flank that truly caught her attention, intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change as she looked at them. "Those markings," she said softly, "they're like the ones in these paintings." As if in response, the horse began to glow faintly, the symbols on its flank pulsing with an otherworldly light. Sarah stumbled back, her heart racing. "Michael!" she called out, her voice echoing in the vast space. "If that's really you in there, I need you to give me a sign, something to help me understand what's going on here." For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the horse began to change. Its form shimmered and blurred, like heat rising off hot asphalt. Sarah watched in awe and terror as the equine shape twisted and morphed, gradually taking on a human form. Where the horse had stood moments before, a man now crouched on the cavern floor. He was naked, his body covered in the same shifting symbols that had adorned the horse's flank. Slowly, he raised his head to meet Sarah's gaze. "Michael Connor?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded, a weak smile playing on his lips. "Ranger Mackenzie, I presume." His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't used it in days. Sarah let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Yeah, that's me. Are you okay? What happened to you out there?" Michael struggled to his feet, accepting the jacket Sarah offered him. "It's a long story," he said, wrapping the garment around his waist. "And honestly, I'm not sure I understand it all myself." Sarah guided him to a relatively flat rock where they both sat down. "Well, we've got time," she said, pulling out her water bottle and offering it to him. "And I think I need to hear this story, no matter how crazy it might be." Michael took a long drink before speaking. "I was on my usual hiking trail when I came across this presence. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like the forest itself was alive watching me." Sarah nodded, remembering the eerie feeling she'd had while tracking him. "Go on," she encouraged. "I heard whispers on the wind, calling me deeper into the woods. I know it sounds insane, but I couldn't resist. That's when I found this cave." He gestured to the painting surrounding them. "As soon as I stepped inside, it was like a floodgate opened in my mind. Suddenly, I could feel this connection to the earth, to the animals. And then, you changed." Sarah finished for him. Michael nodded. "It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I could feel my body shifting, transforming. And then I wasn't just me anymore. I was more." Sarah's mind raced, trying to process what she was hearing. "But how is this possible? People don't just turn into animals." Michael laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the cavern. "That's what I thought too. But there's so much we don't understand about the world, Ranger Mackenzie. These paintings," he gestured to the walls, "they tell a story of an ancient bond between humans and nature, of people who could take on animal forms at will." Sarah stood up, pacing as she tried to make sense of it all. "So you're saying this is some kind of, what, magic? Ancient power?" "I don't know what to call it," Michael admitted. "But I know it's real, I've lived it. And I think you could too." Sarah froze, turning to face him. "What do you mean?" Michael's eyes seemed to glow in the dim light of the cavern. "You followed my trail, didn't you? You saw the tracks change. You found this cave. The forest called to you too, Sarah. You have the potential to be like me." A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. Part of her wanted to dismiss his words as the ravings of a man who'd been lost in the woods too long. But another part, a part that had been growing stronger since she first saw those changing tracks, whispered that he was right. I don't know," she said, her voice shaking. "This is all too much. We need to get you back to civilization. Get you checked out by a doctor." Michael stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, listen to me. What's happening here is bigger than just me. It's an awakening, a return to an ancient way of being. We can't just ignore it or explain it away." As if to emphasize his point, a low rumble echoed through the cavern. The paintings on the walls seemed to shimmer and move in Sarah's peripheral vision. "What was that?" she asked, her hand instinctively going to her tranquilizer gun. Michael's expression grew serious. "A warning, we're not alone here, Sarah. There are others who have embraced this power. Some of them have lost themselves to it." Sarah's mind flashed to the strange cries she'd heard in the forest, the feeling of being watched. "Are we in danger?" Michael nodded grimly. "We might be. Which is why you need to make a choice, and soon. Embrace this gift and help me protect the secret, or leave now and try to forget everything you've seen." As Sarah stood there, the weight of the decision pressing down on her, she realized that her life would never be the same, regardless of what she chose. The world had suddenly become a much larger, much stranger place than she had ever imagined. And somewhere in the depths of the cave, Something ancient stirred, waiting to see what choice she would make. Sarah's mind reeled as she tried to process Michael's words. The cave seemed to close in around her, the ancient paintings on the walls pulsing with an otherworldly energy. She took a deep breath, trying to center herself. "This is a lot to take in, Michael," she said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "You're asking me to believe in something that goes against everything I know about the world." Michael nodded sympathetically. "I know. Trust me, I've been where you are. But once you open yourself to this reality, there's no going back." As if on cue, a gust of wind swept through the cave, carrying with it whispers that seemed just on the edge of comprehension. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael's expression grew serious. "The whispers? Yes. They're trying to communicate with us." Sarah shook her head, trying to clear it. "This is insane. We need to get out of here, report this to—" Her words were cut off as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. This time she could almost make out words. "Sarah, choose. Join us." She stumbled back, her heart racing. "What's happening?" Michael stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "The forest is calling to you, Sarah, just as it called to me. You need to listen." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to block out the impossible situation, but as she did, images flashed through her mind. Herself running through the forest on 4 legs, feeling the earth beneath her paws, soaring high above the trees, seeing the world from a bird's-eye view, swimming in crystal-clear lakes, her body sleek and powerful. Her eyes snapped open, meeting Michael's knowing gaze. How did you do that?" He smiled softly. "I didn't. That was all you, Sarah. Your potential, your connection to nature. It's always been there, just waiting to be awakened." Sarah's legs felt weak. She sank down onto a nearby rock, her head in her hands. "This can't be real. It can't be." Michael crouched beside her. "I know it's overwhelming. But think about it, Sarah. Haven't you always felt a special connection to this forest? A bond that went beyond your job as a ranger?" Sarah looked up, memories flooding back. The times she'd known exactly where to find a lost hiker, as if the trees themselves were guiding her. The way animals seemed to trust her instinctively. The dreams she'd had since childhood of running wild and free through the woods. "Maybe," she admitted hesitantly, "but that doesn't mean—" Her words were cut off as the cave trembled, dust and small rocks raining down from the ceiling. The whispers grew to a crescendo, no longer just in her mind but echoing off the walls. "Choose now, Sarah Mackenzie. Time grows short." Michael's expression turned urgent. "Sarah, listen to me. There are forces at work here beyond our understanding. If you don't embrace this gift, it could be lost forever. And there are others out there, others who would use this power for their own gain." Sarah stood, her ranger instincts kicking in despite the surreal situation. "What do you mean, others?" Michael's eyes darted to the cave entrance. "Not everyone who discovers this power uses it wisely. Some lose themselves to their animal nature. Others see it as a way to dominate, to control." As if summoned by his words, a bone-chilling howl echoed from somewhere deep in the forest. Sarah's blood ran cold. That was no ordinary wolf. "We need to go," Michael said urgently, already moving towards the cave entrance. "It's not safe here anymore." Sarah hesitated, looking back at the ancient paintings. "But what about all this? We can't just leave it." Michael paused, turning back to her. "Sarah, those paintings have been here for thousands of years. They'll endure. But right now we need to focus on surviving, on protecting this secret from those who would abuse it." Another howl, closer this time. Sarah nodded, her decision made. "All right, lead the way." They rushed out of the cave and into the forest. The sun had set while they were underground, plunging the woods into darkness, But to Sarah's amazement, she found she could see clearly, as if the forest itself was illuminating their path. As they ran, Sarah felt a change coming over her. Her senses sharpened, her movements became more fluid. She could smell the rich earth beneath her feet, hear the heartbeats of small animals hiding in the underbrush. "Michael," she called out, her voice tight with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "What's happening to me?" He glanced back, a smile playing on his lips despite the danger. "You're awakening, Sarah. Don't fight it. Let it flow through you." Sarah's body tingled with energy. She felt as if she could run forever, leap over the tallest trees. But along with this newfound power came a primal fear. Something was hunting them, something that radiated malevolence. They burst into a small clearing, bathed in moonlight. Michael skidded to a stop, Sarah nearly colliding with him. "Why are we stopping?" she panted, every nerve on high alert. Michael turned to her, his eyes glowing with an inner light. "Because we can't outrun them forever. It's time for you to fully embrace your gift, Sarah. Are you ready?" Sarah looked at her hands, seeing faint shimmering patterns starting to form on her skin. The whispers in her mind had grown to a roar, urging her to let go, to transform. In the distance, she could hear heavy footfalls approaching, accompanied by guttural growls that were far from human. Sarah met Michael's gaze, her decision made. "I'm ready. Show me how." As Michael began to instruct her, the forest around them seemed to come alive. Branches reached out like welcoming arms, leaves whispered encouragement, and deep within Sarah, something ancient and powerful stirred, ready to be unleashed. The hunt was on, and Sarah Mackenzie was about to discover just how wild she could be. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the moonlit clearing, her body thrumming with newfound energy. Michael's eyes glowed with an otherworldly light as he faced her, his voice urgent, but steady. "Close your eyes, Sarah," he instructed. "Feel the forest around you. Let its energy flow through you." Sarah hesitated for a moment, the rational part of her mind still rebelling against the impossible situation. But the growls growing ever closer pushed her to action. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Immediately, her senses exploded with information. She could hear the rustle of every leaf, smell the rich earth and decaying leaves, feel the vibrations of approaching danger through the soles of her feet. "That's it," Michael encouraged. "Now think of an animal you feel connected to. Let its essence fill your mind." Without conscious thought, the image of a sleek mountain lion formed in Sarah's mind. She could almost feel its power, its grace, its predatory instinct. "I see it," she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. "Good," Michael said. "Now let that image consume you. Imagine your body changing, becoming one with the animal." Sarah focused, her brow furrowing with concentration. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, she felt a tingling sensation spreading through her body. Her muscles tensed and relaxed, bones shifted, and her skin prickled as fur began to sprout. Her eyes snapped open, a gasp escaping her lips as she watched her hands transform into powerful paws. "Michael!" she cried out, panic edging into her voice. "What's happening to me?" But Michael was no longer there. In his place stood a massive black stallion, its coat shimmering with the same strange symbols Sarah had seen in the cave. "Don't fight it," Michael's voice echoed in her mind. "Let the transformation complete itself." Sarah closed her eyes again, surrendering to the change. When she opened them, the world had transformed. Colors were muted, but every movement, every scent was crystal clear. She looked down at her body, now covered in tawny fur, powerful muscles rippling beneath. I did it," she thought, amazed to hear her thoughts projected outward. "Well done," Michael's mental voice answered. "But we don't have time to celebrate. We need to move. Now." As if to emphasize his point, a chorus of howls erupted from the forest edge. Sarah's new feline instincts screamed danger, her hackles rising. What are they? She asked, crouching low, ready to spring. Others like us, Michael explained, pawing the ground nervously. But they've lost themselves to their animal nature. They're more beast than human now. What do? We run. Head for the mountains. There's a place there. A sanctuary. But we have to hurry. Without another word, Michael took off, his powerful equine body easily navigating the dense forest. Sarah followed, marveling at how naturally she moved in her new form. Leaping over fallen logs, ducking under low branches, her feline body responded to her every thought with fluid grace. As they raced through the moonlit forest, Sarah's mind whirled with questions. How long had this been going on? How many others were there like them? And what would happen if they were caught? They had been running for what felt like hours when Michael suddenly skidded to a stop. Sarah nearly crashed into him, her feline reflexes barely allowing her to avoid collision. "Why are we stopping?" she panted, her sides heaving. Michael's ears swiveled, his nostrils flaring. "Listen," he urged. Sarah focused, extending her heightened senses. At first she heard nothing but the usual forest sounds. Then faintly she caught it. The sound of running water. "An underground river," Michael explained. "It's our best chance to lose them. The water will mask our scent." Sarah eyed the sheer rock face before them skeptically. "And how exactly are we supposed to get to it?" In response, Michael began to change, his equine form shrinking and morphing, until a man stood before her once more. Sarah felt a momentary pang of disappointment. She had grown quite comfortable in her mountain lion form. "Your turn," Michael said. "Just focus on your human self." Sarah closed her eyes, concentrating on her human form. The transformation back was quicker but no less disconcerting. When she opened her eyes, she was once again standing on two legs, her ranger uniform in tatters. Michael was already moving towards the rock face, his hands searching for something. "There should be an entrance here somewhere," he muttered. Sarah joined him, running her hands over the cool stone. Suddenly, her fingers caught on a slight indentation. "Here," she called out. Together, they pushed against the rock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound, a section of the wall slid back, revealing a dark passage. "Ladies first," Michael said with a grim smile. Sarah hesitated at the entrance, peering into the inky blackness. The sound of water echoed from deep within, along with something else. Whispers, just on the edge of hearing. "I don't suppose you have a flashlight?" she asked. Michael shook his head. "We'll have to rely on our other senses. Don't worry, they'll be sharper than you're used to, even in human form." As if to emphasize his point, another chorus of howls erupted from the forest, much closer now. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped into the passage, Michael close behind her. The stone door slid shut behind them, plunging them into total darkness. Sarah blinked, waiting for her eyes to adjust. Slowly, shapes began to emerge, the rough walls of the tunnel, the uneven floor beneath her feet. "This way," Michael said, gently guiding her forward. As they descended deeper into the earth, the sound of rushing water grew louder. The air grew cooler and damper, and strange glowing fungi began to appear on the walls, casting an eerie, pulsating light. "What are those?" Sarah asked, reaching out to touch one. Michael caught her hand. "I wouldn't. Some of the plant life down here can be unpredictable." They continued on in silence, the tunnel gradually widening until it opened into a vast underground cavern. Sarah gasped at the sight. A wide, swift-flowing river cut through the center, its black waters reflecting the bioluminescent glow from the cavern walls. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed. "And dangerous," Michael warned. "The current is stronger than it looks. We'll need to be careful crossing." As they approached the river's edge, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The whispers she'd heard earlier grew louder, almost forming words. "Michael," she said, her voice tight, Do you hear that? He nodded grimly. The river has its own guardians. Ancient spirits. They'll let us pass, if they deem us worthy. Sarah swallowed hard, staring into the swirling black waters. Whatever came next, she knew their descent into this underground world marked a point of no return. Her old life, her understanding of the world, was washing away like leaves in the current. As they prepared to step into the river, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, what other secrets lay hidden in the depths of this new, magical world she had stumbled into? The roar of the underground river filled Sarah's ears as she stood at its edge, the spray misting her face. The bioluminescent fungi cast an eerie, pulsating glow across the cavern, making the black water shimmer with an otherworldly light. "So," Sarah said, her voice barely audible over the rushing water, "how exactly are we supposed to cross this?" Michael's eyes scanned the turbulent river, his expression grim. "We swim." Sarah shot him an incredulous look. "You can't be serious. That current looks strong enough to sweep away a car, let alone two people." "We're not just people anymore, Sarah," Michael reminded her. "Our new abilities will help us, but more importantly, we need to trust the river." "Trust the river?" Sarah echoed, skepticism clear in her voice. Michael nodded solemnly. "The water has its own magic, its own consciousness. If we approach with respect and prove ourselves worthy, it will allow us safe passage." Sarah's lungs burned as she fought against the relentless current, her vision blurring as the last of her air escaped in a stream of bubbles. Just as she thought her strength would give out, a strong hand gripped her arm, pulling her upward. She broke the surface with a desperate gasp, coughing and sputtering as she gulped in precious air. "I've got you," Michael's voice reassured her as he dragged her towards a phosphorescent shore. "Just a little further." Sarah's feet finally touched solid ground, and she collapsed onto the glowing sand, her body trembling from exhaustion and cold. As her vision cleared, she looked around in awe at their surroundings. They were in an enormous cavern, its walls shimmering with bioluminescent organisms that cast an ethereal blue-green light throughout the space. Strange, otherworldly plants grew from cracks in the rock, their leaves and flowers pulsing with inner light. Where are we?" Sarah managed to ask between gasps. Michael, looking equally exhausted but more composed, sat down beside her. "We're on the other side," he said simply. "This is a place between worlds, a sanctuary for those like us." Sarah struggled to sit up, her ranger uniform clinging to her like a second skin. "Those like us? You mean shapeshifters?" Michael nodded. "Among other things, this place has been a safe haven for magical creatures and humans touched by magic for centuries." As Sarah's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she noticed movement in the shadows of the cavern. Shapes that were not quite human, not quite animal, flitted at the edge of her vision. "We're not alone," she whispered. "No, we're not," Michael agreed. "But don't worry, most of the beings here are friendly, or at least, not openly hostile." Sarah wasn't sure if that was reassuring or not. She was about to ask more questions when a new voice echoed through the cavern. "Welcome, newcomers," the voice said, seemingly coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We've been expecting you." From the shadows emerged a figure that made Sarah blink in disbelief. It appeared to be an elderly woman, but her skin had a greenish tint, and her hair seemed to be made of living vines and flowers. "I am Gaia," the woman said, her voice carrying the wisdom of ages. "Guardian of this realm and keeper of its secrets." Michael bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you for granting us passage, Gaia. We seek sanctuary from those who would abuse the gift of shapeshifting." Gaia's eyes, glowing like embers, fixed on Sarah. "And you, child? What do you seek?" Sarah swallowed hard, suddenly feeling very small under the ancient being's gaze. I'm not sure. Understanding, I guess. Everything I thought I knew about the world has been turned upside down." A smile played on Gaia's lips. "As it should be." The world is far vaster and more wondrous than most humans dare to imagine. She extended a hand to Sarah. Come, there is much for you to learn, and time grows short. As Sarah took Gaia's hand and stood, the cavern around them seemed to shift and change. The walls expanded, revealing a vast underground world teeming with life. Forests of glowing mushrooms stretched as far as the eye could see, punctuated by crystalline structures that seemed to hum with energy. This is incredible, Sarah breathed, trying to take it all in. This is but a small part of the hidden world that exists alongside your own, Gaia explained as she led them along a winding path. For millennia, magical beings and humans touched by magic have sought refuge here from those who would persecute or exploit them. As they walked, Sarah noticed other beings watching them curiously. Some appeared mostly human, while others were clearly something else entirely. Creatures she had only ever seen in myths and legends. But how is this possible? Sarah asked. How can all of this exist without anyone knowing? Michael chuckled. Oh, some know. But most humans prefer to explain away the unexplainable. It's easier that way. They came to a stop in front of a pool of water so still it looked like a mirror. Gaia gestured for Sarah to look into its depths. The gift you have been given is both powerful and dangerous, Gaia said solemnly. You must learn to control it, to balance your human nature with the wild spirit within you. Sarah peered into the pool, gasping as images began to form on its surface. She saw herself running through the forest as a mountain lion, soaring through the sky as an eagle, swimming in deep oceans as a dolphin. The ability to take on animal forms is just the beginning, Gaia continued. With time and training, you will learn to communicate with the natural world, to tap into the very essence of life itself. As amazing as it all sounded, a nagging worry gnawed at Sarah's mind. But what about my life back home? My job, my family? Gaia's expression softened. The choice to fully embrace this new world is yours alone to make, child. But know that once you have seen beyond the veil, there is no going back to true ignorance. Michael placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. It's a lot to take in, I know. But you're not alone in this. Sarah nodded, grateful for his support. But as she looked around at this hidden, magical world, another question formed in her mind. You said time was growing short, she said, turning back to Gaia. What did you mean by that? The ancient being's face grew grave. The balance between your world and ours is shifting. There are those who seek to exploit the magic for their own gain, to bridge the gap between worlds in ways that could spell disaster for both. The ones who were chasing us? Sarah asked. Gaia nodded. They are but pawns in a larger game. The true threat lies with those who would use the power of shapeshifting and other magics to dominate both humans and magical beings alike. Michael's expression hardened. We've suspected as much for a while now. That's why we've been trying to find and protect those with the gift, like you, Sarah. Sarah's mind reeled with the implications. Just days ago, her biggest concern had been filing ranger reports and guiding lost hikers. Now, she found herself in the middle of a magical conflict with the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance. What can we do? She asked, surprising herself with the determination in her voice. Gaia smiled, a glimmer of hope in her ancient eyes. First, you must complete your training. Learn to harness your new abilities fully. Then, you will join the others in safeguarding the balance between worlds. As if on cue, a group of people, or beings that looked mostly like people, emerged from the forest of glowing mushrooms. Each had a wild, powerful aura about them that Sarah now recognized as barely contained shape-shifting energy. These will be your teachers and your comrades, Gaia said. The path ahead will not be easy, but together, you stand a chance of preserving the wonder and magic of both worlds. Sarah looked at the group, then back at Michael and Gaia. She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady. Where do we start? As Gaia began to outline their training regimen, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. Her old life seemed a distant memory now, replaced by a world of magic, danger, and infinite possibilities. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink as Sarah emerged from the dense forest. Her ranger uniform was in tatters, her body ached from the grueling training she had undergone in the Hidden Realm, and her mind was still reeling from all she had learned. But there was a new strength in her stride, a wild glint in her eye that hadn't been there before. As the trees thinned out, Sarah found herself on the outskirts of a small farm. A weathered barn stood silently in the fading light, and a quaint farmhouse sat nestled among overgrown fields. The scene was so mundane, so normal, that for a moment Sarah wondered if she had imagined everything that had happened. But then she felt it, a subtle thrum of energy pulsing through the earth beneath her feet, the whisper of secrets carried on the wind. This place was more than it appeared. Sarah approached the farmhouse cautiously, her newly heightened senses on high alert. As she neared the porch, the screen door creaked open. An elderly couple stepped out, their expressions serene despite Sarah's bedraggled appearance. "Well, well," the old woman said, her voice warm and welcoming. "Looks like you've had quite the journey, dear." Sarah blinked in surprise. Yes, I suppose I have. How did you know?" The old man chuckled, a twinkle in his eye. "Oh, we've been expecting you. It's not every day a new shapeshifter finds their way to our doorstep." Sarah tensed, ready to shift forms if necessary. "You know about shapeshifters?" "Know about them?" The old woman laughed. "Child, we've been guarding the secret for longer than you've been alive. I'm Martha, and this is my husband, George. We're the caretakers of this place." George nodded, gesturing for Sarah to come closer. "No need to be afraid. You're safe here. Come inside. You look like you could use a hot meal and a warm bed." Still wary but too exhausted to refuse, Sarah followed the couple into the farmhouse. The interior was cozy and warm, with well-worn furniture and walls lined with curious artifacts and old photographs. But there was something else too, a sense of ancient power, carefully contained and protected. "Please sit," Martha said, guiding Sarah to a comfortable armchair. "I'll fix you some tea. George, why don't you go check on our other guest?" Sarah's head snapped up. "Other guest?" George smiled knowingly. "Yes, the young man who arrived a few days ago. I believe you've been looking for him." Sarah's heart raced as she realized who they must be talking about. "Michael, he's here?" As if on cue, footsteps sounded from the hallway. Sarah turned to see Michael enter the room, looking far more relaxed than she had ever seen him. His eyes widened in surprise and relief when he saw her. "Sarah, you made it!" he exclaimed, crossing the room to embrace her. "I was starting to worry." Sarah returned the hug, a wave of relief washing over her. "It's good to see you too. But how did you get here? The last thing I remember is the underground river, and then..." Michael's expression grew serious. "It's a long story. What matters is that we're both safe now." Martha returned with a tray of steaming mugs. "Here we are. Some nice chamomile tea to calm the nerves. Now, why don't you both tell us about your adventures?" As they sipped their tea, Sarah and Michael took turns recounting their experiences: the chase through the forest, the hidden cave, the underground river, and the magical realm beyond. Martha and George listened intently, occasionally nodding or exchanging knowing glances. "It seems you've both been through quite the ordeal," George said when they had finished. "But your journey is far from over." Sarah set down her mug, a determination settling over her. "You're right. There's so much more I need to learn, to understand. And there are others out there who would misuse this power. We have to stop them." Martha reached out, patting Sarah's hand gently. "All in good time, dear. For now, you both need rest. The road ahead will be challenging enough without you collapsing from exhaustion." As if on cue, Sarah felt a wave of fatigue wash over her. The events of the past few days suddenly caught up with her, and she found herself struggling to keep her eyes open. "Come," Martha said, standing. "I'll show you to your rooms. We can talk more in the morning." Sarah followed Martha up a creaking staircase, her mind swirling with questions. Just as they reached the top, she remembered something. "Wait," she said, turning to Martha. "How did you know we were coming? Are you shapeshifters too?" Martha smiled mysteriously. "We're something a bit different, dear. Let's just say we have our ways of knowing things. Now get some rest. Tomorrow is a new day, and you have much to learn." As Sarah settled into the soft bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this farm and its elderly caretakers than met the eye. But for now she was safe, and Michael was nearby. It was enough. Just as she was drifting off to sleep, a sound from outside caught her attention. It was faint but unmistakable, the howl of a wolf, carrying on the night wind. But there was something off about it, something almost human. Sarah sat up, fully alert now. She moved to the window, peering out into the moonlit fields. There, at the edge of the forest, she saw a figure. It was too far to make out clearly, but she could have sworn its eyes glowed in the darkness. As she watched, the figure turned and loped into the trees, moving with a grace that was decidedly inhuman. Sarah's heart raced. Was it another shapeshifter? Friend or foe? A soft knock at her door made her jump. "Sarah?" Michael's voice came through. "Did you hear that?" She opened the door to find Michael looking as alert and concerned as she felt. "I did," she whispered. "What do you think it means?" Michael's expression was grim. "I'm not sure, but I have a feeling our respite here might be shorter than we hoped. We should talk to Martha and George in the morning. If there are other shapeshifters in the area, they need to know." Sarah nodded, a mix of excitement and apprehension coursing through her. Whatever tomorrow brought, she knew one thing for certain. Her new life was only just beginning, and it promised to be wilder and more dangerous than she ever could have imagined. As she closed the door and returned to bed, Sarah couldn't help but smile. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive, truly part of something greater than herself. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them head on. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon roused Sarah from her slumber. For a moment she lay in bed, disoriented, before the events of the past few days came rushing back. She sat up, her senses immediately on high alert. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, casting intricate patterns on the worn wooden floor. Sarah dressed quickly in clothes Martha had left for her, simple jeans and a flannel shirt that felt oddly comforting after her tattered ranger uniform. As she descended the creaky staircase, Sarah heard hushed voices coming from the kitchen. She paused, listening intently. "Can't keep them in the dark much longer," Michael was saying, his voice tinged with urgency. "Patience, young man," George replied calmly. "There's a time and place for everything. And speaking of which..." The conversation abruptly halted as Sarah entered the kitchen. Martha turned from the stove, beaming. "Good morning, dear. I trust you slept well?" Sarah nodded, taking in the scene. Michael sat at the table, looking slightly uncomfortable, while George sipped coffee from a chipped mug. The domesticity of it all felt surreal after the wild events of the past few days. "I did, thank you," Sarah replied, accepting a steaming mug from Martha. "But I couldn't help overhearing. Is there something we need to know?" A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Martha and George exchanged a meaningful look before George sighed, setting down his mug. "I suppose there's no point in delaying any further," he said. "You've both shown remarkable courage and adaptability. It's time you learned the full truth." Sarah took a seat next to Michael, her heart racing with anticipation. Martha joined them, her usually cheerful expression now serious. "What you've experienced, the shape-shifting, the hidden realms, it's only the tip of the iceberg," George began. "For millennia, there has been a delicate balance between the mundane world and the world of magic. We," he gestured to himself and Martha, are part of an ancient order tasked with maintaining that balance. The Guardians, Michael breathed, his eyes wide with recognition. Martha nodded. Yes, though we've been called many names throughout history. Druids, shamans, wise ones. Our purpose has always been the same: to protect the magical world from those who would exploit it and to guide those with the gift like yourselves. Sarah's mind reeled. But how? I mean, I've lived in these woods for years. How could I not have known about any of this? George chuckled softly. Oh, but you did know, Sarah. On some level, you've always known. Why do you think you were drawn to become a ranger? Why could you always seem to find lost hikers when others couldn't? Your gift was already manifesting, albeit subtly. Sarah sat back, stunned. It all made sense now. The inexplicable feelings she'd had in the forest, her uncanny ability to track, even her vivid dreams of running wild through the woods. So what happens now? Michael asked, leaning forward. You mentioned others who would exploit this power. Who are they? Martha's expression darkened. There have always been those who seek to use magic for personal gain or domination. In recent years, a group has emerged that poses a particular threat. They call themselves the Harbingers. The ones who were chasing us in the forest, Sarah realized. George nodded grimly. Yes, they believe that the magical world should no longer hide in the shadows. They want to reveal its existence to humanity, to use its power to reshape the world as they see fit. But that's insane, Sarah exclaimed. The chaos, the fear it would cause. Exactly, Martha agreed. The balance between worlds exists for a reason. Humanity isn't ready for the full truth, not yet. The consequences could be catastrophic. Michael ran a hand through his hair, looking troubled. So where do we fit into all this? What can we do? George leaned forward, his eyes intense. You and others like you represent a new generation of protectors. Your ability to bridge both worlds makes you uniquely suited to combat the Harbingers and maintain the balance. Sarah felt a weight settling on her shoulders, the magnitude of the responsibility sinking in. But we're barely trained. How can we possibly stand against an organized group? Martha reached out, taking Sarah's hand in her own. That's where we come in, dear. This farm isn't just a safe haven. It's a training ground. We can teach you to harness your abilities, to become the guardians the world needs. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen as Sarah and Michael absorbed this information. The simple life Sarah had known as a ranger seemed a distant memory now, replaced by a world of magic, danger, and cosmic responsibility. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice quiet, but determined. I'm in. Whatever it takes, I want to help protect this balance. Michael nodded in agreement. Me too. We can't let the Harbingers succeed. George smiled, a glimmer of hope in his weathered features. Excellent. We'll begin your training immediately. But first, he stood, walking to a nearby cabinet and retrieving an ancient-looking book bound in leather. There's something you need to see. He placed the book on the table, carefully opening it to reveal pages covered in intricate diagrams and text in a language Sarah didn't recognize. This is the Codex Arcanum, Martha explained. It contains the accumulated knowledge of our order, passed down through generations. Within its pages, you'll find the history of our world, the nature of your gifts, and the keys to unlocking your full potential. As Sarah and Michael leaned in to examine the book, a gust of wind swept through the kitchen, causing the pages to flutter. For a moment, Sarah could have sworn she saw the illustrations move, as if alive. George's voice took on a solemn tone. Remember, with great power comes great responsibility. The path ahead will be dangerous, but you won't face it alone. Are you ready to truly begin your journey? Sarah met Michael's gaze, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. She turned back to George and Martha, her voice steady. We're ready. Teach us everything. As George began to explain the first lessons from the Codex, Sarah felt a thrill of excitement mixed with trepidation. Her old life was gone, replaced by something far grander and more perilous than she could have imagined. But as she looked around at her newfound allies, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The truth had been revealed, and there was no turning back. The real adventure was just beginning. The afternoon sun filtered through the farmhouse windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Sarah sat cross-legged on the living room rug, the Codex Arcanum open before her. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to decipher the ancient text. Michael paced back and forth, his restless energy palpable. "I still can't believe all of this," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Magical realms, ancient orders, secret wars. It's like something out of a fantasy novel." Sarah looked up from the book, a wry smile on her face. "Tell me about it." "A week ago, my biggest concern was filing ranger reports. Now," she gestured to the Codex, "now I'm trying to learn an ancient magical language." George entered the room, carrying a tray of steaming mugs. "Chamomile tea," he said, setting the tray down. "It'll help calm your nerves. How's the studying coming along?" Sarah sighed, accepting a mug gratefully. "Slowly. This language is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's the language of nature itself," George explained, settling into an armchair. "Once you learn to hear it in the rustle of leaves and the flow of water, reading it will become second nature." Michael stopped pacing, turning to face George. "But how long will that take? The harbingers are out there right now, planning who knows what. Shouldn't we be doing something more active?" George's expression turned serious. "I understand your impatience, Michael, but rushing into conflict unprepared would be disastrous. You both need to fully awaken your abilities first." As if on cue, Martha entered the room, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "Speaking of which, I think it's time for a practical lesson. Come with me." Curious, Sarah and Michael followed Martha out to the back of the farmhouse. A large, open field stretched out before them, bordered by the dense forest. Martha turned to face them, her demeanor suddenly more commanding than the gentle farm wife they'd come to know. "You've both experienced shapeshifting, but only in moments of extreme stress or danger. Now, you'll learn to control it at will." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "How do we start?" "Close your eyes," Martha instructed. "Feel the earth beneath your feet, the wind on your skin. Listen to the whispers of the world around you." Sarah did as she was told, surprised at how quickly she could tune into the subtle energies Martha described. She could sense the life force of every blade of grass, every insect in the field. "Now," Martha continued, "think of an animal you feel a connection to. Let its essence fill your mind, your body." Without conscious thought, the image of a sleek mountain lion formed in Sarah's mind. She could almost feel its power, its grace. "Excellent!" Martha's voice seemed to come from far away. "Now let that image consume you. Imagine your body changing, becoming one with the animal." Sarah focused, her brow furrowing with concentration. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly, she felt a tingling sensation spreading through her body. Her muscles tensed and relaxed, bones shifted, and her skin prickled as fur began to sprout. Her eyes snapped open, a gasp escaping her lips as she watched her hands transform into powerful paws. "Martha!" she cried out, panic edging into her voice. "What's happening to me?" But when she looked up, she was stunned to see not Martha, but a majestic eagle perched on a nearby fence post. Next to her, where Michael had been standing, was a powerful gray wolf. "Don't fight it," Martha's voice echoed in her mind. "Let the transformation complete itself." Sarah closed her eyes again, surrendering to the change. When she opened them, the world had transformed. Colors were muted, but every movement, every scent was crystal clear. She looked down at her body, now covered in tawny fur, powerful muscles rippling beneath. I did it," she thought. amazed to hear her thoughts projected outward. "Well done, both of you," Martha's mental voice answered. The eagle spread its wings, soaring into the sky. "Now let's see what you can do." What followed was the most exhilarating experience of Sarah's life. She ran through the field, reveling in the power and grace of her mountain lion form. Michael raced beside her, his wolf form easily keeping pace. They leaped over fences, climbed trees, and even swam in a nearby stream, all under Martha's watchful guidance. As the sun began to set, they made their way back to the farmhouse. Sarah concentrated, focusing on her human form, and felt the now familiar sensation of transformation wash over her. Within moments, she was standing on two legs again, breathless and exhilarated. Michael shifted back as well, a wide grin on his face. "That was incredible," he panted. Martha, back in her human form, beamed at them both. "You've both shown remarkable aptitude. But remember, with this power comes great responsibility." George was waiting for them on the porch, a serious expression on his face. "I'm glad you've made progress," he said as they approached, "because we've received some troubling news." Sarah's heart sank. "What is it?" George sighed heavily. "Our contacts have informed us that the Harbingers are on the move. They're planning something big, something that could expose the magical world to humanity." Michael's expression hardened. "Then we have to stop them. When do we leave?" "It's not that simple," George cautioned. "You're both still new to your abilities. Going up against the Harbingers now would be extremely dangerous." Sarah felt torn. On one hand, she knew George was right. They were far from ready for a direct confrontation. On the other, the thought of standing by while the Harbingers threatened everything they'd sworn to protect was unbearable. "What are our options?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Martha and George exchanged a look. "We can continue your training here," Martha said. "Prepare you as best we can for the challenges ahead, or, Michael prompted. George's expression was grave. "Or you can choose to face this threat now, knowing the risks. But understand, if you do, there may be no coming back. The life you knew before will be gone forever." A heavy silence fell over the group. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She thought of her life as a ranger, of the simple joys and challenges she'd known. Then she remembered the thrill of shapeshifting, the vast hidden world she'd glimpsed, and the responsibility that came with her newfound powers. When she opened her eyes, her decision was made. "I'm in," she said, her voice firm. "Whatever it takes, I want to help stop the Harbingers." Michael nodded, stepping forward to stand beside her. "Me too. We can't let them succeed no matter the cost." Martha's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "We knew you'd say that. You both have the hearts of true guardians." George nodded solemnly. "Very well. We'll leave at first light. But tonight, we have much to prepare. The road ahead will be dangerous, but you won't face it alone." As they headed inside to plan their next move, Sarah felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. She knew that come morning, she would be leaving behind everything she had ever known. But as she looked at Michael, at Martha and George, she realized she had also gained something invaluable, a purpose and a family united in protecting the balance between worlds. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back now. The pre-dawn air was crisp and heavy with anticipation as Sarah stood at the edge of the farm's property. Her heart raced, a mixture of excitement and fear coursing through her veins. Today was the day she would fully awaken her shape-shifting abilities, pushing beyond the controlled transformations she had practiced. Michael stood beside her, his face a mask of determination. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "As ready as I'll ever be." George and Martha approached, their expressions solemn. Martha carried a small, intricately carved wooden box which she opened to reveal two pendants, each bearing a strange, shimmering symbol. These talismans, George explained, will help you maintain your connection to your human consciousness during the full awakening. Without them, you risk losing yourself to your animal nature. Sarah accepted the pendant, feeling its weight as she slipped it around her neck. The metal was cool against her skin, but she could sense a faint buzz of energy emanating from it. Martha stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern. Remember, this process will be intense. You'll experience a complete merge with your spirit animal. Every instinct, every primal urge will be heightened. The talisman will help, but ultimately, it's your will that must remain strong. Michael nodded, his jaw set. We understand. We're ready. George gestured towards the forest. Then it's time. Enter the woods and let your spirit animals guide you. We'll be here when you return. With a final glance at each other, Sarah and Michael stepped into the forest. The trees seemed to close in around them, the early morning mist adding to the mystical atmosphere. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, going deeper into the woods than Sarah had ever ventured before. Finally, they reached a small clearing, bathed in the first rays of dawn. I guess this is it, Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. Michael reached out and squeezed her hand. Whatever happens, we're in this together. They moved to opposite sides of the clearing, facing each other. Sarah closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing as Martha had taught her. She reached out with her senses, feeling the life force of the forest around her. Slowly, the image of her spirit animal, the mountain lion, formed in her mind. But this time, instead of just visualizing the animal, Sarah felt as if she was looking through its eyes, feeling its power course through her body. A gasp escaped her lips as the transformation began. It was unlike anything she had experienced before. Every cell in her body seemed to shift and change, her very essence merging with that of the mountain lion. Sarah's eyes snapped open. The world around her transformed. Colors were sharper, scents more intense. She could hear the heartbeat of a rabbit hiding in a nearby bush, sense the vibrations of Michael's transformation across the clearing. She looked down at her body, now fully shifted into the form of a magnificent mountain lion. But this was more than just a physical change. Sarah could feel the animal's instincts and knowledge flooding her mind, generations of wild wisdom suddenly accessible. Across the clearing where Michael had stood was now a massive gray wolf. His blue eyes, still recognizably his own, met Sarah's gaze. Michael? Sarah projected the thought, surprised at how natural it felt to communicate this way. Sarah, came the reply, Michael's mental voice tinged with awe. This is incredible. Before they could exchange more thoughts, a primal urge swept through Sarah. The mountain lion's instincts screamed at her to run, to hunt, to fully embrace this wild form. Without conscious decision, Sarah found herself bounding into the forest, her powerful legs carrying her swiftly through the underbrush. She could sense Michael following, his wolf form easily keeping pace. They ran for what felt like hours, leaping over fallen logs, scaling rocky outcrops, and swimming across swift streams. Sarah had never felt so alive, so in tune with the natural world around her. As they paused on a high ridge, overlooking a vast expanse of forest, Sarah felt a moment of clarity. This was what it meant to be a shapeshifter, not just to wear the form of an animal, but to truly become one with nature itself. But with that realization came a new challenge. The mountain lion's instincts were strong, urging her to forget her human life, to remain in this form forever. Sarah could feel her grip on her human consciousness slipping. Michael, she called out mentally, a note of panic in her thoughts. I'm losing myself. The animal, it's so strong. Michael padded over to her, his wolf eyes filled with concern. Focus on the talisman, Sarah. Remember who you are, why we're doing this. Sarah concentrated on the pendant around her neck, feeling its energy pulsing against her fur. Slowly, memories of her human life came flooding back. Her time as a ranger, meeting Michael, The lessons with George and Martha, their mission to stop the Harbingers. With a tremendous effort of will, Sarah began to reassert control. She was both human and animal now, a perfect balance of two worlds. As the sun reached its zenith, Sarah felt a pull back towards the farm. It was time to return. With a shared glance, she and Michael began the journey back, moving with a new grace and understanding of the forest around them. They emerged from the trees just as the sun was setting, their bodies smoothly transitioning back to human form as they approached George and Martha. Martha rushed forward, enveloping them both in a warm embrace. "You did it. We were so worried." George smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "How do you feel?" Sarah took a moment to assess herself. She felt different, more connected to the world around her. Even in her human form, she could sense the life force of the trees, the small animals scurrying in the underbrush. "Changed," she said finally. "Like I'm seeing the world clearly for the first time." Michael nodded in agreement. "It's like a veil has been lifted. I can sense things I never could before." George's expression grew serious. "This is just the beginning. Now that you've fully awakened your abilities, your real training can begin." As they walked back to the farmhouse, Sarah felt a new sense of purpose settling over her. The awakening had been intense, even dangerous, but she knew it was necessary. Whatever challenges the Harbingers might bring, she and Michael were now better prepared to face them. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she could still feel the echo of her spirit animal's presence. But instead of feeling conflicted or overwhelmed, she felt whole. Human and animal, civilization and wilderness. She was a bridge between worlds. As sleep claimed her, Sarah's last conscious thought was of the journey ahead. The awakening was complete, but she knew that her true test was yet to come. Sarah trudged through the forest, her ranger uniform in tatters, her mind reeling from the events of the past few days. The weight of her newfound secret pressed heavily upon her as she approached the ranger station. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. "Sarah!" exclaimed her colleague Mike, jumping up from his desk. "Where the hell have you been? We've had search parties out looking for you." Sarah forced a tired smile. "It's a long story, Mike. Is Chief Hansen around?" Mike nodded, eyeing her suspiciously. "Yeah, he's in his office, but Sarah, you look like you've been through hell. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she lied, avoiding his gaze. "Just need to report in." As she walked towards the chief's office, Sarah could feel the stares of her fellow rangers. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding. "Come in," called a gruff voice. Chief Hansen looked up as she entered, his eyes widening in surprise. "Roberts, where in God's name have you been?" Sarah took a seat, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sir, I found the missing hiker. He's safe and has been returned to his family." The chief leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "That's good news, but it doesn't explain your 4-day disappearance or why you look like you've been mauled by a bear." Sarah swallowed hard. "We got lost in a part of the park I wasn't familiar with. It took some time to find our way back. As for my appearance, I had a few falls in some rough terrain." Chief Hansen's eyes narrowed. "Roberts, I've known you for years. You don't get lost. What really happened out there?" For a moment, Sarah considered telling him everything. About the transformation, the hidden world of shapeshifters, the ancient secrets of the forest, but the words caught in her throat. "I'm sorry, sir. It's hard to explain. I just need some time to process everything." The chief sighed, his expression softening slightly. "All right, Roberts, take a few days off. But I expect a full report on my desk by the end of the week." As Sarah left the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life would never be the same. Over the next few days, Sarah tried to settle back into her routine, but everything felt different. Her senses were heightened, making her hyper-aware of every sound and smell in the forest. She found herself constantly fighting the urge to shift, to run wild with her newfound pack. One afternoon, while on patrol, Sarah noticed a group of hikers veering off the main trail. As she approached to redirect them, a familiar scent caught her attention. It was faint but unmistakable, the musky odor of a shapeshifter. "Excuse me," she called out to the hikers. "This area is off limits. Please return to the marked trail." As the group turned to leave, Sarah's eyes locked with one of the hikers, a tall, muscular man with piercing green eyes. He nodded slightly, a knowing look passing between them. Later that evening, as Sarah was finishing up her shift, she felt a presence behind her. She spun around to find the man from the trail standing there. "Ranger Roberts," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm Jack, your new boss. I've been assigned to oversee this sector of the park." Sarah's wolf instincts bristled. There was something off about Jack, a predatory aura that set her on edge. "Nice to meet you, sir. I wasn't aware we were getting new management." Jack smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Lots of changes coming, Roberts. I've heard good things about you. I'm looking forward to working together." As he walked away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She reached out telepathically to her pack, sending a warning. Something wasn't right. Over the next few weeks, strange reports began to filter in. Hikers spoke of unusually aggressive animal behavior. Rangers found inexplicable tracks that seemed to shift between human and animal. Sarah knew in her gut that these incidents were connected to the shapeshifter world, but she couldn't risk exposing the secret. One evening, as Sarah was locking up the station, she overheard Jack on the phone. "Yes, everything is proceeding as planned," he was saying in a hushed voice. "The park is the perfect cover. No one suspects a thing." Sarah's blood ran cold. She slipped away quietly, her mind racing. Whatever Jack was involved in, it couldn't be good for the park or the shapeshifter community. That night, Sarah met with her pack in a secluded clearing. The elderly couple who had first introduced her to this hidden world were there, along with the once missing hiker and several others. "We have a problem," Sarah began, her voice grave. "I think Jack is a rogue shapeshifter. He's up to something that could threaten everything we've worked to protect." The elderly woman, Margaret, nodded solemnly. "We've sensed a disturbance in the forest's energy. Something dark is stirring." "What do we do?" asked Tom, the former missing hiker. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. "We investigate. We find out what Jack is planning and we stop him. But we have to be careful. One wrong move and our entire world could be exposed." As the group dispersed, Sarah gazed up at the star-filled sky. The forest whispered around her, alive with secrets and hidden dangers. She knew that the greatest challenge of her life lay ahead, one that would test not only her newfound abilities, but also her very humanity. With a soft sigh, Sarah let her transformation take hold. In her wolf form, she melted into the shadows of the forest, ready to protect the land she loved and the incredible secret she now carried. The crisp autumn air carried a hint of danger as Sarah patrolled the outskirts of Yellowstone. Her heightened senses were on full alert, scanning for any sign of the mysterious predator that had been terrorizing the park. The attacks had begun shortly after Jack's arrival, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the two were connected. As she rounded a bend in the trail, the coppery scent of blood hit her nostrils. Sarah quickened her pace, her heart racing. In a small clearing, she found the gruesome remains of an elk, torn apart in a way no natural predator would hunt. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Roberts," she spoke into her radio, her voice tight. "I've got another animal attack site at Grid 7 Alpha. Send the response team." "Copy that, Roberts," came the crackled reply. "Be advised, Supervisor Jack is en route to your location." Sarah's muscles tensed at the news. She knelt to examine the scene more closely, her trained eye picking up details her human colleagues would miss. The tracks around the carcass shifted erratically between elk hooves and something that looked disturbingly human. The sound of an approaching vehicle made Sarah stand, composing herself as Jack's SUV pulled up. He stepped out, his green eyes surveying the scene with an unsettling intensity. Nasty business, this, Jack commented, crouching beside the carcass. What do you make of it, Roberts? Sarah chose her words carefully. It's unlike anything I've seen before, sir. The attack pattern doesn't match any known predator in the park. Jack nodded, a strange smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Nature is full of surprises, isn't it? Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones we least expect. His words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Before she could respond, the rest of the response team arrived, and the clearing became a flurry of activity. Later that evening, Sarah met with her pack in a hidden cave deep in the forest. The mood was tense as she recounted the day's events. It has to be Jack, Tom insisted, pacing nervously. The timing is too convenient. He shows up and suddenly we have a shapeshifter gone rogue? Margaret, the elderly woman who had become a mentor to Sarah, shook her head. We can't jump to conclusions. Accusing a fellow shapeshifter without proof could have dire consequences for our community. But we can't just sit back and do nothing, Sarah argued. These attacks are getting worse. It's only a matter of time before a human gets hurt, or our secret gets exposed. The cave fell silent as everyone contemplated the gravity of the situation. Finally, Sarah stood, her decision made. We need to investigate Jack, she declared. I'll keep an eye on him at the ranger station. Tom, you and the others monitor his movements when he's in the park. If he's our rogue shapeshifter, we'll catch him in the act. As the others nodded in agreement, Margaret approached Sarah, her wise eyes filled with concern. Be careful, my dear. If Jack is indeed responsible, he's more dangerous than you can imagine. A shapeshifter who kills for pleasure loses touch with both their human and animal sides. They become something other. Sarah squeezed the older woman's hand reassuringly. I'll be careful, I promise. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself in a delicate balancing act. By day, she played the role of dedicated ranger, working alongside Jack and pretending not to notice his increasingly erratic behavior. By night, she and her pack scoured the park for clues, following leads and tracking strange animal sightings. The breakthrough came on a moonless night. Sarah was on a solo patrol when she picked up Jack's scent, mixed with the now familiar odor of fresh blood. She followed the trail deep into the forest, her heart pounding as she shifted into her wolf form. In a moonlit clearing, she found him. Jack stood over the body of a young deer, his face and hands smeared with blood. But it was his eyes that made Sarah's blood run cold. They glowed with an unnatural light, filled with a hunger that went beyond mere predatory instinct. I knew you'd find me eventually, Sarah, Jack said, his voice a guttural growl. I could smell your suspicion from the moment we met. Sarah shifted back to her human form, keeping her eyes locked on Jack. Why are you doing this? You're breaking every code we live by, Jack laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the trees. Codes? Rules? We're beyond that, Sarah. We have the power to be apex predators, to take whatever we want. Why restrain ourselves? Because we're not just animals, Sarah shot back. Our humanity is what makes us special, what gives us the privilege of walking between two worlds. Humanity is overrated, Jack snarled, his form beginning to shift and twist. Let me show you true power. Sarah watched in horror as Jack transformed, not into a natural animal, but into a monstrous hybrid of bear and man. He lunged at her with terrifying speed, forcing Sarah to shift and dodge. The forest echoed with growls and snapping branches as the two shapeshifters battled. Sarah fought with every ounce of her strength and skill, but Jack's unnatural form gave him a deadly advantage. Just as Sarah felt her strength failing, a chorus of howls split the night. Her pack had arrived, surrounding Jack with a ring of snarling wolves, cougars, and bears. Outnumbered, Jack retreated, melting into the shadows with a final, chilling promise. This isn't over, Sarah. The hunt has only just begun. As her pack gathered around her, offering comfort and support, Sarah gazed into the dark forest. She knew Jack was right. This was far from over. The real battle for the soul of their hidden world was just beginning, and Sarah would need every ounce of her courage and newfound abilities to face the challenges ahead. The forest was unnaturally quiet as Sarah and her pack moved silently through the underbrush. Weeks of careful tracking and surveillance had led to this moment. Jack's reign of terror was about to end. "He's close," Tom whispered, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "I can smell his corruption." Sarah nodded, her senses on high alert. "Remember the plan. We surround him, cut off his escape routes. No one engages alone." The pack spread out, each member taking their assigned position. Sarah's heart pounded as she crept forward, every instinct screaming danger. Suddenly a twig snapped behind her. "Well, well," Jack's voice dripped with malice. "The gang's all here. I'm touched you went to so much trouble for little old me." Sarah spun around, coming face to face with her former boss. Even in human form, Jack exuded an aura of menace that made her skin crawl. "It's over, Jack," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We know what you've been doing. The killings, the cover-ups. It stops now." Jack's laugh was cold and hollow. "Oh, Sarah, you still don't get it, do you? This is evolution in action. We're meant to be predators, not park rangers playing by human rules." "You're wrong," Sarah countered. "Our gift is about balance, about bridging two worlds. What you're doing is an abomination." Jack's eyes flashed dangerously. Strong words from someone who's barely scratched the surface of her powers. "Let me show you what true mastery looks like." With a sickening crack of bones and sinew, Jack began to transform. But this was no ordinary shift. His body contorted and stretched, becoming a nightmarish fusion of bear, wolf, and man. Razor-sharp claws extended from massive paws, while a wolf-like muzzle filled with dagger-like teeth snarled at them. "Holy shit," Tom breathed, his own half-shifted form looking almost puny in comparison. Sarah felt a momentary flash of fear, but steeled herself. "Now!" she shouted, signaling the pack to attack. The clearing erupted into chaos. Shapeshifters in various animal forms converged on Jack, but his monstrous hybrid form proved devastatingly effective. He swatted aside a charging elk shifter with ease, while his jaws clamped down on the leg of a cougar, eliciting a pained yowl. Sarah shifted into her wolf form, darting in to nip at Jack's flanks before retreating. But even her speed wasn't enough. Jack's clawed hand caught her mid-leap, slamming her to the ground. "You disappoint me, Sarah," Jack growled, his voice a horrifying mix of human and beast. "I offered you power beyond your wildest dreams, and you chose to remain weak." Pinned beneath his massive paw, Sarah struggled to breathe. "It's not weakness," she gasped out. "It's strength, to resist the darkness inside us." Jack leaned in closer, his hot breath washing over her. "Pretty words, but they won't save you or your pathetic pack." Suddenly, the air around them began to shimmer and pulse. The very trees seemed to groan, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. Jack's grip loosened as he looked around in confusion. "What is this?" he snarled. "What are you doing?" Sarah felt a surge of energy coursing through her, unlike anything she'd experienced before. It was as if the forest itself was lending her its strength. With a primal roar, she threw Jack off, her wolf form growing larger, more powerful. "The forest remembers," Sarah growled, her voice resonating with an otherworldly power. "It knows its true guardians." The battle resumed with renewed intensity. Sarah moved with impossible speed and strength, her attacks leaving glowing trails of energy in the air. The other pack members seemed to draw on this power as well, their forms shifting and adapting mid-fight. Jack, for the first time, looked uncertain. "What are you?" he demanded, lashing out with increasing desperation. "We are what you could have been," Sarah answered, dodging his attacks with fluid grace. "Protectors, not destroyers. In harmony with nature, not dominating it." The tide of the battle turned. Jack found himself on the defensive, overwhelmed by the coordinated attacks of Sarah and her pack. With a particularly vicious swipe, Sarah sent him crashing into a massive oak tree. Jack slumped to the ground, his monstrous form flickering and fading. "You don't understand," he panted, blood trickling from numerous wounds. "The power, it's intoxicating. Once you've tasted it, there's no going back." Sarah approached cautiously, the rest of the pack forming a wary circle around them. She shifted back to her human form, looking down at Jack with a mixture of pity and resolve. "There's always a choice, Jack," she said softly. "But you're right about one thing. We can't go back. Not after what you've done." The elderly couple who had first introduced Sarah to the shapeshifter world stepped forward. Margaret's eyes were sad but determined as she addressed Jack. "You've broken our most sacred laws," she intoned. "The penalty is severe. Are you prepared to face judgment?" Jack's laugh was bitter. "Do I have a choice?" Tom growled, still in his bear form. "We should end him now. He's too dangerous to be left alive." Sarah held up a hand. "No, we're not executioners. There's been enough killing." She turned back to Jack, her expression grave. "But we can't let you continue like this. There's only one way to ensure the safety of both our world and the human one." Understanding dawned in Jack's eyes, followed quickly by fear. "No, you can't. You don't know what you're doing." Margaret placed a gnarled hand on Sarah's shoulder. "The binding ritual is dangerous, child. It will require great sacrifice." Sarah nodded, a sense of calm settling over her. "I know, but it's the only way." As the pack began preparations for the ancient ritual, Sarah gazed out into the forest. The trees seemed to whisper their approval, the very air thrumming with anticipation. She knew that what lay ahead would test her to her very limits, but for the first time since this ordeal began, she felt truly ready to embrace her role as guardian of two worlds. The confrontation was over, but the true test was yet to come. The air crackled with tension as Sarah stood at the edge of the ancient grove. Jack, now bound and weakened, lay at the center of an intricate pattern of stones and symbols etched into the earth. The rest of the pack formed a protective circle around the clearing, their eyes glowing in the twilight. Margaret approached Sarah, her wizened face etched with concern. "Child, are you absolutely certain about this? The binding ritual is not to be taken lightly. It will demand a piece of your very essence." Sarah took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. "I understand the risks, Margaret, but we can't let Jack continue on this path of destruction. It's the only way to protect both our worlds." The elderly woman nodded solemnly. "Very well. But remember, once the ritual begins, there's no turning back. The price must be paid, one way or another." As Margaret began to prepare the sacred herbs and talismans needed for the ritual, Tom approached Sarah, his human form tense with worry. "Sarah, let me do this," he pleaded. "You've already sacrificed so much. I can't stand by and watch you risk everything again." Sarah placed a gentle hand on his cheek. "I appreciate the offer, Tom, but it has to be me. I'm the one who tracked Jack down, who exposed his crimes. The responsibility is mine." Tom's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Just come back to us, okay? We need you. I need you." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted from the center of the clearing. Jack had managed to work his way into a sitting position, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and rage. "You fools," he snarled. "You have no idea what you're messing with. The power I've tapped into, it's beyond your comprehension." Sarah approached him cautiously. "It's over, Jack. Your reign of terror ends tonight." Jack's laugh was hollow and bitter. "And what then, Sarah? You'll strip me of my power, make me ordinary? I'd rather die than go back to that pathetic existence." "This isn't about punishment," Sarah explained, her voice firm, but not unkind. "It's about balance. The power you've abused, it's corrupting you, turning you into something you were never meant to be." For a moment, something like doubt flickered in Jack's eyes. "And what if I don't want to be saved? What gives you the right to make that choice for me?" Sarah crouched down, meeting his gaze. "Because sometimes, Jack, we need others to save us from ourselves. I'm offering you a chance at redemption, a way back to the person you were before the darkness took hold." Jack's response was cut short as Margaret called out, "It's time. The moon is reaching its zenith." Sarah stood, taking her place at the head of the stone circle. The pack members began to chant in an ancient language, their voices blending with the whispers of the wind through the trees. Margaret approached with a ceremonial dagger, its blade gleaming in the moonlight. "Are you ready, child?" Sarah nodded, extending her palm. She winced as Margaret made a shallow cut, allowing several drops of blood to fall onto the ground at Jack's feet. "With this offering," Margaret intoned, "we begin the binding. May the spirits of the forest bear witness and lend their strength." The air around them began to shimmer and pulse with an otherworldly energy. Sarah felt a tugging sensation in her chest, as if invisible threads were being woven between her and Jack. Jack's eyes widened in panic. "No, you can't do this. I won't go back to being weak." With a roar of desperation, he summoned the last of his strength, his form beginning to shift and twist into the monstrous hybrid that had terrorized the forest. "Hold him!" Sarah shouted, as several pack members rushed to restrain Jack. The ritual reached its crescendo, the chanting growing louder as the very ground beneath them trembled. Sarah felt as if her entire being was being torn apart and reassembled. Memories flashed before her eyes, her first transformation, the thrill of running with the pack, the beauty and terror of the wild. Through it all, she could sense Jack's essence, dark and corrupted but with a flickering spark of humanity still buried deep within. Sarah focused on that spark, willing it to grow, to overcome the darkness that had consumed him. "Fight it, Jack," she called out, her voice strained with effort. "Remember who you were, who you can be again." Jack's monstrous form thrashed and howled, caught between two worlds. "I can't," he cried, his voice a mixture of human anguish and bestial rage. "It's too strong." Sarah pushed harder, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. "You can. I believe in you, Jack. Find your way back." With a final earth-shattering roar, a blinding light erupted from the center of the circle. Sarah felt something tear free from her very soul, a piece of her essence flowing into the maelstrom of energy surrounding them. When the light faded, Sarah found herself on her knees, gasping for breath. In the center of the circle lay Jack, once again in his human form, unconscious but breathing steadily. Margaret rushed to Sarah's side, supporting her. "It's done, child. The binding is complete." Sarah looked up, her vision blurry. "Did it work? Is he?" The elderly woman nodded. "His connection to the corrupted power has been severed. He'll live, but as an ordinary human, with no memory of his life as a shapeshifter." As the pack gathered around, offering support and comfort, Sarah gazed at Jack's prone form. The price had been high. She could feel the void where a piece of her spirit had been torn away. But looking at the peaceful expression on Jack's face, she knew it had been worth it. "What happens now?" Tom asked, helping Sarah to her feet. Sarah took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. "Now, we heal. We learn from this and grow stronger. And we remain ever vigilant, protecting the balance between our world and the human one." As the first light of dawn began to peek through the trees, Sarah and her pack prepared to face a new day, forever changed by the sacrifices of the night. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the sacred grove. Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear. The air was thick with tension as the pack gathered, their faces etched with worry and determination. Margaret approached, her weathered hands clutching a bundle of sacred herbs. "Sarah, my child, are you absolutely certain about this? The binding ritual is ancient and perilous. There's no shame in stepping back." Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "I'm sure, Margaret. We can't let Jack continue down this dark path. If my sacrifice can save him and protect our worlds, then it's a price I'm willing to pay." The elderly woman nodded solemnly. "Very well. Let us begin." As Margaret began to prepare the ritual circle, Tom sidled up to Sarah, his eyes filled with concern. "Sarah, please, let me do this instead. You've already risked so much for us." Sarah placed a gentle hand on his cheek. "I appreciate the offer, Tom, but it has to be me." I'm the one who brought Jack into our world. I need to be the one to set things right. Before Tom could protest further, a commotion erupted from the center of the clearing. Jack, still bound by enchanted ropes, had managed to work himself into a sitting position. His eyes blazed with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You're all fools," he snarled. "You have no idea of the power you're dealing with. It's beyond your comprehension." Sarah approached him cautiously, her voice steady. "We understand more than you think, Jack. The power you've tapped into. It's corrupting you, turning you into something you were never meant to be." Jack's laugh was bitter and hollow. "And what if I want to be this? What gives you the right to decide my fate?" "Because sometimes," Sarah replied softly, "we need others to save us from ourselves. This isn't just about you, Jack. It's about protecting both our world and the human one." Margaret's voice cut through the tension. "It's time. The moon has reached its zenith." Sarah took her place at the head of the ritual circle, her heart racing. The pack members formed a protective ring around the clearing, their eyes glowing in the moonlight. Margaret began to chant in an ancient language, her voice carrying on the night air. As the ritual began, Sarah felt a strange pulling sensation in her chest. It was as if invisible threads were being woven between her and Jack, connecting their very essences. The air around them began to shimmer and pulse with otherworldly energy. Jack's eyes widened in panic. "No, you can't do this to me. I won't go back to being weak and powerless." With a roar of desperation, he summoned the last of his strength. His form began to twist and contort, growing larger and more monstrous by the second. The pack members rushed to restrain him, struggling against his unnatural strength. "Hold him!" Sarah shouted, her voice strained with effort. The ritual reached its peak, the chanting growing louder as the very ground beneath them trembled. Sarah felt as if her entire being was being torn apart and reassembled. Memories flashed before her eyes. Her first transformation, the thrill of running with the pack, the beauty and terror of the wild. Through it all, she could sense Jack's essence. It was dark and corrupted, but deep within, she could still perceive a flickering spark of his true self. Sarah focused on that spark, willing it to grow, to overcome the darkness that had consumed him. "Fight it, Jack," she called out, her voice barely audible over the roar of mystical energies. "Remember who you were, who you can be again." Jack's monstrous form thrashed and howled, caught between two worlds. "I can't," he cried, his voice a mixture of human anguish and bestial rage. "It's too strong. The power. I can't let it go." Sarah pushed harder, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. "You can. I believe in you, Jack. Find your way back to the light." The air crackled with energy, and Sarah felt something tear free from her very soul. A piece of her essence flowed into the maelstrom surrounding them, merging with the binding spell. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the center of the circle. Sarah was thrown backward, her vision blurring as she struggled to remain conscious. When the light faded, she found herself on her knees, gasping for breath. In the center of the circle lay Jack, once again in his human form. He was unconscious but breathing steadily, his face peaceful for the first time in months. Margaret rushed to Sarah's side, supporting her. "It's done, child. The binding is complete." Sarah looked up, her vision swimming. "Did it work? Is he?" The elderly woman nodded, a mixture of relief and sadness in her eyes. "His connection to the corrupted power has been severed. He'll live, but as an ordinary human, with no memory of his life as a shapeshifter." As the pack gathered around, offering support and comfort, Sarah gazed at Jack's prone form. She could feel the void where a piece of her spirit had been torn away, a constant ache that she suspected would never fully heal. Tom knelt beside her, his eyes filled with concern and admiration. "Sarah, what you did, it was incredible. But at what cost?" Sarah took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of her sacrifice settle upon her. "The cost was high, but it was necessary. We've protected our world and given Jack a chance at redemption." As the first light of dawn began to peek through the trees, Sarah slowly rose to her feet. She looked around at her pack, seeing the mixture of awe and worry on their faces. "What happens now?" one of the younger shapeshifters asked. Sarah squared her shoulders, her voice gaining strength. "Now, we heal. We learn from this and grow stronger, and we remain ever vigilant, protecting the balance between our world and the human one. This trial has shown us the dangers of losing our way, but it's also revealed the strength we possess when we stand together." As the group began to disperse, preparing to face the new day, Sarah cast one last glance at Jack's sleeping form. The ritual had changed them both in ways she was only beginning to understand. But as she felt the first warm rays of sunlight on her face, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together, as guardians of two worlds. The sacred grove pulsed with an otherworldly energy as the binding ritual reached its climax. Sarah stood at the center of the maelstrom, her body racked with pain as she channeled the ancient magic. Across from her, Jack writhed on the ground, his form flickering between human and the monstrous hybrid he had become. "Fight it, Sarah!" Margaret called out, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "You must hold on." Sarah gritted her teeth, feeling as if her very essence was being torn apart. In her mind's eye, she could see the spiritual plane where the true battle was taking place. Her wolf spirit, lean and fierce, faced off against Jack's corrupted bear, a towering monstrosity of shadows and rage. "You can't win, Sarah." Jack's voice echoed in her mind, dripping with malice. "The power I've tapped into, it's beyond anything you can imagine." Sarah's wolf circled warily, looking for an opening. "This isn't about winning, Jack. It's about setting things right." With a roar that shook the spiritual plane, Jack's bear lunged forward. Sarah's wolf darted aside, but not quite fast enough. Spectral claws raked across her flank, sending shockwaves of pain through her physical body. In the physical world, Sarah stumbled, crying out in agony. Tom rushed to her side, supporting her. "Sarah, what's happening?" It's too strong," Sarah gasped, her eyes unfocused. I can't hold him back alone." Margaret's eyes widened in realization. "The pack bond. Sarah, call upon the strength of your pack. Let their spirits join yours." With the last of her strength, Sarah reached out telepathically to her fellow shapeshifters. "Please, I need your help. Lend me your strength." One by one, the pack members stepped forward, placing their hands on Sarah's shoulders. As they did, she felt a surge of energy course through her. In the spirit world, spectral forms began to appear alongside her wolf. A sleek cougar, a majestic elk, a soaring eagle, and more. Jack's bear faltered, taking a step back. "No, this isn't fair. This is my power." Sarah's wolf, now glowing with the combined energy of the pack, stood tall. "You're wrong, Jack. True strength comes from unity, not domination." The spirit animals moved as one, encircling Jack's bear. Each time the corrupted creature lashed out, it was met with a coordinated defense. Slowly but surely, they began to wear it down. In the physical world, Jack's body convulsed violently. "No, I won't go back to being weak. I can't." Sarah knelt beside him, her voice strained but compassionate. "It's okay, Jack. Let go of the darkness. Remember who you truly are." As she spoke, she placed her hand on Jack's forehead. A blinding light erupted from the point of contact, engulfing them both. In the spirit world, Sarah's wolf lunged forward, sinking its teeth into the neck of Jack's bear. But instead of tearing flesh, it seemed to be drawing out a dark, oily substance. The bear roared in agony, thrashing wildly. "That's it, Sarah," Margaret called out. "Draw out the corruption." Sarah felt as if she was being torn in two. The darkness she was extracting from Jack threatened to overwhelm her, seeping into her very being. For a moment, she teetered on the edge of losing herself. "Sarah!" Tom's voice cut through the chaos. "Come back to us. Don't let it take you." Anchored by Tom's words and the strength of her pack, Sarah pushed back against the darkness. With one final, monumental effort, she tore the last of the corruption from Jack's spirit. The spiritual plane shattered around them, and Sarah found herself back in the physical world. She collapsed to the ground, utterly spent. Beside her, Jack lay motionless. For a long, tense moment, the grove was silent, save for the heavy breathing of the exhausted shapeshifters. Then, slowly, Jack's eyes fluttered open. What happened?" he mumbled, his voice weak and confused. "Where am I?" Margaret knelt beside him, her expression a mixture of relief and caution. "You're safe now, Jack. The darkness that possessed you has been banished." Jack's eyes widened as fragmented memories began to surface. "Oh God, what have I done? The people I hurt, the animals." Sarah, still struggling to catch her breath, reached out to take his hand. "It wasn't your fault, Jack. The power corrupted you. But you're free now." Tears welled up in Jack's eyes. "How can you even look at me after everything I've done? I don't deserve your kindness." "Redemption is a journey, not a destination," Margaret said softly. "You have a second chance now. What you do with it is up to you." As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, the pack gathered around Sarah and Jack. Tom helped Sarah to her feet, his eyes filled with concern and admiration. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "What you did, it was incredible." Sarah managed a weak smile. "I'll be all right, but I can feel the change within me. The ritual, it took something from me that I don't think I'll ever get back." Margaret nodded solemnly. "The price of such powerful magic is always high. But you've saved not just Jack, but potentially countless others who might have fallen victim to his rampage." As the group began to disperse, preparing to face the new day and its challenges, Sarah cast one last glance at Jack. He sat with his head in his hands, the weight of his actions clearly crushing down upon him. "What happens now?" one of the younger pack members asked. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the mantle of leadership settle more firmly on her shoulders. "Now, we heal. We learn from this and grow stronger. Jack's journey of redemption begins, and we'll be there to guide him. And we remain ever vigilant, protecting the balance between our world and the human one." As they made their way out of the grove, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this ordeal, harrowing as it had been, was just the beginning. The forest whispered around her, alive with secrets and hidden dangers. But for the first time since this all began, she felt truly ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, her vision blurry and unfocused. The familiar scent of pine and earth filled her nostrils as she slowly became aware of her surroundings. She was lying in a soft bed of moss within a secluded glade, sunlight filtering through the canopy above. "She's awake," Tom's voice called out, filled with relief. Margaret's weathered face came into view, her eyes creased with concern. "Easy, child. You've been unconscious for 3 days." Sarah tried to sit up, wincing at the effort. Every muscle in her body ached, and she felt a strange hollowness within her chest. 3 days? What happened? Where's Jack? Tom knelt beside her, gently helping her into a sitting position. "Jack's alive. The ritual worked, but there were complications." Margaret nodded solemnly. The binding spell was successful in stripping Jack of his corrupted powers, but it also erased his memories of the shapeshifter world. He's back in the human world now, living as an ordinary man. Sarah's mind reeled with the implications. He doesn't remember anything? Not even what he did? "It's for the best," Tom said softly. "He has a chance at a new life now, unburdened by the guilt of his actions." As Sarah processed this information, she became acutely aware of the change within herself. The connection to her wolf spirit, once so vibrant and alive, now felt muted and distant. "Margaret," she said, her voice trembling, "what happened to me? My wolf. I can barely feel her." The elderly woman took Sarah's hand in hers. The ritual exacted a heavy price, child. You poured a significant portion of your essence into the binding spell. Your connection to your spirit animal has been diminished. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. Will I ever be able to shift again? Margaret's expression was gentle but uncertain. Only time will tell. The spirit world works in mysterious ways. But for now, you must focus on regaining your strength. As the days passed, Sarah slowly recovered her physical strength, but the absence of her wolf spirit left a gaping void in her soul. The pack rallied around her, offering support and encouragement, but she could sense their unease. Without her full powers, how could she continue to lead and protect them? A week after awakening, Sarah stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the vast expanse of Yellowstone. Tom approached, his footsteps deliberately loud to announce his presence. "Penny, for your thoughts?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. Sarah sighed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I'm trying to figure out where we go from here. The shapeshifter community is divided. Some think we should retreat further into secrecy, while others believe we should be more proactive in protecting the balance between our world and the human one." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "And what do you think?" "I think—" Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think we've been given a unique opportunity. We've seen firsthand the dangers of isolating ourselves, of losing touch with our humanity. Maybe it's time we found a middle ground." As if on cue, Margaret's voice called out from behind them. "Sarah, we have a situation." They turned to see the elderly woman approaching, accompanied by a young ranger Sarah recognized from the Park Service. "Sarah, this is Alex," Margaret introduced. "He's one of us. He's been keeping an eye on things in the human world, and he has some concerning news." Alex stepped forward, his expression grave. "There's been talk among the higher-ups in the Park Service. They're planning to expand some of the tourist areas into territories we've long considered sacred. If they go through with it, it could disrupt the delicate balance we've maintained." Sarah finished, her mind racing. "We can't let that happen." Tom's eyes widened. "But how can we stop it without exposing ourselves?" Sarah stood silent for a moment, her gaze sweeping across the landscape she'd sworn to protect. Then slowly, a smile spread across her face. "We don't stop it. We guide it." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, child?" "We've been hiding in the shadows for too long," Sarah explained, her voice gaining strength. "It's time we took a more active role in shaping the future of this land. Alex, how would you feel about a promotion within the Park Service?" Alex looked surprised but intrigued. "I'm listening." Over the next hour, Sarah outlined her plan. They would strategically place shapeshifters in key positions within the Park Service and environmental organizations. From there, they could subtly influence decisions, ensuring that development respected the sacred spaces of both the natural and supernatural worlds. "It's risky," Tom cautioned. "If we're discovered, it's a risk we have to take," Sarah countered. "We can't keep living in fear of discovery. It's time we became true guardians of this land, bridging the gap between our world and theirs." Margaret studied Sarah for a long moment, then nodded approvingly. "You've grown wise beyond your years, child. This path won't be easy, but I believe it's the right one." As the group dispersed to begin implementing the plan, Sarah remained at the cliff's edge. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses. For a brief moment, she felt a flicker of her wolf spirit, distant but not gone. "We'll find our way back to each other," she whispered. "And when we do, we'll be stronger than ever." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scents and sounds of the forest. Sarah breathed deeply, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since the ritual, she felt hope blossoming in her chest. As she turned to join the others, Sarah cast one last glance at the vast wilderness before her. The land had changed her, tested her, and nearly broken her. But it had also given her a new purpose, a new pack, and a new vision for the future. With a small smile, Sarah stepped away from the cliff, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The rebirth of the shapeshifter community had begun, and she would be at the forefront, guiding them towards a future where two worlds could coexist in harmony. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of pine and wild sage as Sarah led her team through the dense Yellowstone forest. 6 months had passed since the binding ritual, and the world had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. "Alex, what's our status on the new trail project?" Sarah asked, her voice low but clear. The young ranger, now sporting a senior Park Service badge, consulted his tablet. "We've managed to reroute the proposed path away from the sacred grove. The board bought our argument about preserving a unique ecological zone." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Good work. Tom, any updates on our furry friends?" Tom, his eyes scanning the tree line, replied, "The wolf pack we've been monitoring has settled into their new den. No conflicts with hikers so far." As they continued their patrol, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how seamlessly her two worlds had begun to blend. Her team was a carefully selected mix of humans and shapeshifters, each bringing unique skills and perspectives to their mission of protecting the park. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught Sarah's eye. She held up a hand, signaling the team to stop. "Did you see that?" Before anyone could respond, a massive grizzly bear burst from the underbrush, roaring in pain and fury. Sarah's heart raced as she noticed the tranquilizer dart protruding from its flank. "Poachers," Tom growled, his body tensing as if ready to shift. Sarah placed a calming hand on his arm. "Not here, not now. We handle this as rangers first." She turned to the human members of her team. "Davis, Carter, set up a perimeter. Alex, call for backup and alert the local authorities." As the team sprang into action, Sarah cautiously approached the bear, her hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "Easy, big guy. We're here to help." The bear's eyes, wild with fear and anger, locked onto Sarah. For a moment she felt a flicker of her old connection, a whisper of understanding passing between human and beast. The grizzly's aggressive stance softened slightly. "That's it," Sarah soothed. "Just stay calm. We'll get that dart out and you'll be feeling better in no time." As she inched closer, ready to remove the dart, a sharp crack echoed through the forest. Sarah's enhanced senses picked up the sound of approaching footsteps and hushed voices. "The poachers are coming back," she whispered to Tom. "Get ready." Moments later, 2 men burst into the clearing, rifles at the ready. They froze at the sight of Sarah and her team, their faces paling. "Park Rangers," Sarah announced, her voice ringing with authority. "Drop your weapons and put your hands where I can see them." What followed was a tense standoff, with the poachers glancing nervously between the rangers and the still agitated bear. Sarah could sense Tom and Alex, both shapeshifters, coiled and ready to act if things went south. Finally, one of the poachers lowered his rifle. All right, we give up. Just don't let that thing eat us." As Alex moved to apprehend the poachers, Sarah turned her attention back to the bear. With gentle hands, she removed the tranquilizer dart, whispering words of comfort. "There you go, friend. You're safe now." The bear grunted softly, its eyes meeting Sarah's once more. Then, with a final huff, it lumbered back into the forest. As the local authorities arrived to take the poachers into custody, Sarah gathered her team. "Excellent work, everyone. This is exactly the kind of situation we've been training for." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah found herself in a secluded glade with Margaret. The elderly woman had become both mentor and confidant in the months following the ritual. "You handled that situation beautifully today," Margaret said, her eyes twinkling with pride. "You're finding the balance between your two worlds." Sarah smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I just wish I could feel my wolf again. Fully, I mean. There are moments when I almost connect, but it's like trying to grasp smoke." Margaret placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Patience, child. The spirit world works in mysterious ways. Your sacrifice was great, but I believe your connection will return when the time is right." As if in response to Margaret's words, a cool breeze swept through the glade. Sarah closed her eyes, breathing deeply. For a split second, she felt it. The wild, untamed essence of her wolf spirit, closer than it had been in months. Her eyes snapped open. "Did you feel that?" Margaret's smile widened. "I did. It seems your journey is far from over, Sarah." Before Sarah could respond, her radio crackled to life. "Chief, we've got a situation near the eastern boundary. Some hikers are reporting. Well, you're going to want to see this for yourself." Sarah exchanged a glance with Margaret. "Duty calls. Want to tag along? See what all the fuss is about?" The older woman chuckled. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." As they made their way through the darkening forest, Sarah felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. Whatever this new challenge was, she knew her team, her pack, would face it together. The trees seemed to whisper around them, alive with secrets and hidden wonders. Sarah breathed in the wild scent of the forest, feeling more at home than ever. She had found her place, bridging two worlds, protecting the delicate balance between human and nature, seen and unseen. As they approached the eastern boundary, a strange glow illuminated the sky ahead. Sarah's pulse quickened, her senses on high alert. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready. This was her purpose, her calling. Guardian of two worlds, protector of the wild, she stepped forward into the unknown, eager to face whatever new adventure awaited. The story of Yellowstone's shapeshifters was far from over. In fact, Sarah realized with a smile, it was only just beginning.